Introduction. We are as much in harmony with the archetypal realm when afflicted as when in beatific states of transcendence. James Hillman, Facing the Gods. The saints and sages from the dawn of human memory have been teaching us the same singular, extraordinarily simple lesson, but we aren't very attentive students. Even those of us who hang on every word cannot seem to get the message. Everything we do, every act we take, possession we seek, place we desire, or beloved we long to be near is driven by our pursuit of only one thing: authentic joy. The greatest of life's treasures is all around us and ever abundant, but hidden in plain sight by our ego's blinding light that leaves it as seemingly far from reach as the end of the rainbow. From the stories of enlightened souls, we vaguely recognize how it is discovered. In my life, it goes like this. My personal world burns down around me, leaving nothing of emotional or tangible pleasure for my ego to grasp. Then majestic gates of epiphany swing wide, divine ecstasy descends, and I am no longer upset by utility bills, impossible relationships, belly fat, failing knees, hips, eyes, or colossal rejection by adult, child, partner, employer, fill in the blank. All miseries of my old world are released, and poof! In an instant I can see what no one else can, that which cannot be seen in our world. And I can tell no one, because the limits of language cannot convey it. Without realizing it, we have witnessed this 1,000 times. This same moment of epiphany occurs at 2/3 of the way through stories, where all hope is lost, the hero's ego is finally slain, and a new perspective is born. It goes like this. A hero charges onto the stage hell-bent on pursuit of something in the material world. Money, fame, power, vengeance, or perhaps earthly love. Stumbles badly, triggers utter ruin in some form, and out of the ashes rises humility. With it comes a profound revelation of something greater than anything seen in the manifest world. Generally, none of the other characters believe the hero's newfound perspective, but the audience certainly does, as it vicariously moves through the experience with the hero. Joseph Campbell writes of this moment as the hero receiving the elixir of life. In some stories, the revelation is dramatic, as in the film Rain Man, when a self-centered, angry, financially desperate man kidnaps his disabled brother from an institution and holds him for ransom against the estate of their recently deceased father. At his come-to-Jesus moment, with the defeat of his ego, he is suddenly overwhelmed by the beauty and power of just loving his brother. This, of course, completely changes his life. Naturally, the officials trying to recover the brother believe none of it. In other stories, it is subtle, as in the film Buffalo 66, where a beleaguered loner at the bottom of the social hierarchy finds ecstatic joy in the simple act of buying a donut for a stranger. The epiphany which triumphs over the ego is found in every story because this is what makes a story, rather than an essay, journal entry, or report. It is the primal, perennial rhythm which James Joyce coined the monomyth, and it holds a secret map to enlightenment for all of us, what I have termed the universal grammar of story. Stories let us touch on something greater than ourselves by witnessing a worthy hero struggle again and again up and finally over the vertical slope of a character arc, like a salmon fighting its way 70 feet up the crashing water of Celilo Falls. While glorious for the hero and the salmon, it seemingly lacks triumph for the passive observer. perhaps munching popcorn on a tourist observation deck overlooking the dam which drowned the falls in 1957. Yet, just by hearing the story of the falls and the glory it bestowed onto its surrounding native community, the audience manages to feel a tiny, transformative drop of the elixir of life. Yes, it's true that transformation only comes out of suffering, but we suffer some just in hearing a powerful story which pulls our emotion down into despair, then up into exhilaration as we rise with the hero into newfound hope through a new perspective. Stories let us keep our life fully intact while taking us into alien and vulnerable terrain. This is how we preserve energy from something vital which appears to be gone. The energy of the falls carries forth through its story, which is why it is so vital to retell stories through the generations. What feels like a passive, vicarious, and unconscious state is an animating force of life through which nobility brushes over and anoints us. I have reached the mountaintop of divine ecstasy twice. Once on a conscious, intentional, and direct path up through the rough terrain of a monastic life, and again on an oblivious path of casting my plays onto the stage and my books onto the shelves of shops. This spiritual path came first, triggered by the good fortune of having my world absolutely and irrevocably collapse, leaving me in emotional, financial, and family ruin. I began the steep rock climb up a disciplined spiritual path of fasting, prayer, and abstinence. I found escape in 8-hour group meditations waiting for nirvana, sitting ramrod straight, legs tingling to sleep beneath me on cold tile. At the end of 2 years, the great moment came, but not as I fantasized in a Tibetan cave during an eclipse on the summer solstice where I would levitate off my prayer rug after a 3-week fast capped by a 24-hour meditation. No, instead, nirvana rushed over me at Gate 6 in the El Paso airport after a burger and fries capped with a pint of beer. I had grown impatient with life as the meditating vegetarian, swearing off sugar, alcohol, caffeine, sex, and most difficult of all, anger. But before giving that all up, I decided to turbocharge my do-it-yourself monastic life in sloppy, wet Oregon and get as close as I could to 40 days in the desert with a sadhu. That wish materialized working as a journalist for the Army in New Mexico at the White Sands Missile Range. Home of Trinity Site, ground zero for the testing of the first atomic bomb. In this hermitage, bugle calls replaced temple bells, and I turned my devotion from the Gnostic Gospels and Upanishads to my master's thesis analyzing a mountain of books on storytelling, dating from the early Greeks to the present. Missing, of course, was the sadhu, until out of the crackling hot summer appeared an 83-year-old whiskey-sipping, chain-smoking Jesuit priest who governed all things metaphysical on the base. Father Batowski referred to himself as a renta priest for the military, invoking a status that might have helped him abstain from material attachment, since theoretically at any moment he could be uprooted and sent into service anywhere. He was there for 32 years. The desert monsoons began soon after we met. In the cool of the evenings, we contemplated philosophical and sacred texts, punctuated by fat threads of lightning striking the jagged, rocky-peaked Oregon mountains. So humid was the air during those weeks that book pages fell heavily and pencils would no longer write on paper. In July of my first year at the base, I traveled to Trinity Site. There, I felt strangely drawn to settle into a bit of contemplation, right next to that horrible marker of history. Closing my eyes, I braced myself for what I expected to be some unpleasant apparition of my mind, appearing to defeat my attempt at self-centeredness, which in this place seemed sacrilegious. Yet something deep within me compelled me into radioactive meditation. My logical mind, shocked at the inappropriateness of my act, persisted to knock at the door of my intuition, demanding I desist this inappropriate act, underscored by colleagues' raised eyebrows, and return to everyday sensibilities. Fortunately, my few years of meditative discipline gave me the determination to focus. A sense of the sacred arose within and around the paradox of this moment, in this place, having spawned incredible evil that haunted my own family life through stories of misery endured by my stepfather's family in native Japan. Moving past that guilt, I experienced something new, a sense of more than dichotomies of good or evil. I left the site in a state of bewildered lightness, on the edge of ethereal majesty. That evening, I asked the good father if this was my Tibetan cave moment. He burst into laughter, shook his head in delight, and said, "No, my dear." He took a few moments to compose himself before asking, "Did you really dust off your sneakers in the kitchen sink?" "But I felt something," I said. He interrupted. "Divine ecstasy is like love. You know it when you're in it." For a moment, he seemed to savor a distant memory. Then he struck a match, pulled in a rich cloud of blue smoke, and said, "There is no doubt, none." This I understood when I arrived at Gate 6 of El Paso Airport. Dragging my carry-on luggage to the last empty chair, I settled in to await the long ride back to my homeland, the Pacific Northwest. The others at the gate seemed tense and oddly quiet. I understood why when, after a few moments, an unhappy, ungroomed, late middle-aged grandmother screamed at her 8-year-old grandson. "I am not finished with you. I did not want to take you in the first place." Each syllable carried her family's legacy, hell-bent on defeating its children early and soundly. The boy recoiled, shoulders drooped. I, like him, shifted in my seat and wished for the mercy of the remote desert. And so it came. It began as a tingling, traveling across my head, along my neck, and down my back. I began to feel light and ethereal, as in my moment of Tibetan cave trinity sight. But then, a burst of overwhelming, disorienting joy claimed me, and I felt as if I might lift off my chair and float. The veil of my everyday life swept aside, and I saw absolute beauty in the face and screams of the grandmother. It was as if someone else had arisen in her form, as if the armor she had forged over years of grinding pain vanished. Staring into her eyes, I saw a lonely child crying for understanding. The fact that I was born a coward, ever and always terrified of confrontation, made my next move incomprehensible to the previous me. Watching in amazement, I stood up, walked to her, reached out my hand and touched her shoulder. I chuckled lovingly and smiled like a proud mother, comforting a colicky baby. Her anger evaporated. The word "whoa" wafted from somewhere across the room. The grandmother looked back at me bewildered, started to stand, lost her balance, and gently settled back onto her seat. I playfully touched her cheek and paused before returning to my seat with all eyes following me. I don't know what happened next because I was lost in a delirious state of incomprehensible, incomparable happiness, one that cannot be explained because there are no words. Looking around, everyone seemed to be beautiful and perfect exactly as they were. The mess of my life was no longer a mess. The collapse of my life having burned down around me, transformed into something beautiful, like the compost going into the roots of the ancient tree in my backyard. So, of course, as the hero of any story will tell you, unless you are a saint, divine rapture starts disintegrating the moment it reaches its peak. No ordinary soul can sustain the Cheshire smile long in the demanding face of accounts payable, outraged young adult children, piles of dirty dishes, and the long wait in an unemployment line. I spent the next several months sipping wine and biting into chocolates, while translating all those books I read in the desert into data points for cross-methods analysis. Following the qualitative analysis, I then converted some of the data into numerical form for quantitative data crunching. In a moment of gestalt, or rather in a panic of excitement, the events of the character arc, leading up to a moment of conscious awakening that strikes at 2/3 of the way through any story, were the same events in my own life leading up to the moment at the El Paso airport, as well as in the lives of others I've encountered or biographies I've read. Every story builds toward a hero's moment of spiritual awakening, a consciousness-altering epiphany. We see it in Rain Man, when the angry brother, starting out only wanting money, suddenly realizes the love he feels for his disabled brother is far more valuable than money. Be it subtle or profound, story characters and spiritual seekers undergo the same experience, and so do writers. No dedicated writer gets out of storytelling unscathed, any more than a devoted parent gets out of child-rearing unchanged. While we are plotting our hero's transformation through the character arc we think we are creating for them, they in turn come to life and transform us by the telling, as if the dreamed become aware of the dreamer. In this way, storytelling becomes our Tibetan cave, a bewildering path to enlightenment. This depth of learning does not come about by reading books on writing or taking classes. Those are important ways of gathering information to use later, but it is not the information exchange between teacher and student or book and reader that brings a great story into the world. Rather, it is an existential awakening allowing you to suddenly understand what all those books and all those teachers meant on the level of the personal and the collective unconscious. Our journey into the storyteller's life begins with the mechanical act of gathering story elements and putting them together according to universal laws. But the magic of a story's power comes through the grace of our characters, especially the beauty of the villains who humble our egos. That is when the information we have amassed forges into knowing, into gnosis. The architecture of transformation of the writer and their characters is mapped in a universal grammar of story, in repeating structures, rhythms, and patterns, through which the world's most powerful stories come into creation. But it will take your personal journey to bring it to life. The soul of your story, its life force, comes from your creativity, your encounter with characters who enter the world through you. This book provides you with the blueprint, the architecture universal to all stories. As a writer, you instinctively already know, but have forgotten. This book bridges the gap between what you know and what you have forgotten you know. The universal grammar of story consists of 4 pillars. 1. The call to write, the urge driving us into a story, and how writers draw from their logical, emotional, and intuitive forms of intelligence to answer the call. 2. The logos, or the power of language. How particular words and word structures drive literary power, and how simple changes in your everyday speech can radically enhance your emotional intelligence. 3. The core narrative theories, or logical structure of great stories in terms of their character chemistry, rhythm, and timing. 4. The psychological, mystical philosophy of stories that naturally appear of their own accord, which are brought into the story not by the author, but by the audience. Volume 1 in this series addresses the call to write. Writing is not a choice to be made. It is a destiny to be fulfilled by those born with a craving to tell stories. There are no timelines or milestones to achieve before declaring your love for the written word. It makes no difference whether you have been writing for years to critical acclaim, or if in your elder years you are just now setting your first story to the blank page. We writers have been living the secret life of Walter Mitty since childhood, daydreaming story fragments and craving to weave our fantasies into fables. We are born with the ancient story archetype, and we never outgrow it. No matter how many times we swear off writing forever, we find ourselves right back at it. Money, a career, and fame are the occasional fringe benefits, the earthly pleasures of a few writers, but they are not why we write. Ultimately, we write to awaken ourselves and others. In the hands of a storyteller, post-traumatic stress transforms into post-traumatic growth. For that, you need the wisdom of your literary ancestors, their instruction, their insight. This book is their messenger.